So I'm going to be brief, and I'm going to try and provoke questions and discussion, and I think it's going to be helpful going forward into the year, and it will be clearer. Thanks so much, Sephora. So it came to be clear. It came as clear feedback from Tebe Marake, who did our consulting surveys last year, that sometimes it's unclear to parents what we do, how we do it, why we do it, what's our curriculum, etc. And so I want to open up a process that's going to be easy for me to do, and also easy for parents to pop in to understand how we work. And I'm going to keep it as efficient as possible, so we do little bits at a time to make a visit to the Zoom room every week easy for anyone to do. And I'm recording them in case people want to look. I can't return to them at some point. So thanks for joining. So today I thought it will be helpful to start with this framework that we've evolved over the years as a way of summarizing how we conceive of what we do. So it's relevant to the curriculum, and it's relevant to how everything works. And educationally, in a sense, that is the same thing, because a curriculum is not simply a document that sits in an office. And in the country, it's not simply a set of documents that sits as a expectation of what teachers should teach by the end of each term and each year and each phase of series of grades, but it is in fact what happens. And there's usually a confusion in educational conversations that when someone says the word curriculum, what is often meant is what the document says. But curriculum as a concept really means what is in fact taught, not what is intended to be taught. And therefore, there's the document which clarifies set of objectives, sometimes more specific and sometimes broader. And it's also something that is hidden in the documents, because what a child receives is often much, much broader than the document. In fact, in some sense, it will always happen that what a child is in fact taught is more than the document, because education is not simply a set of concepts and a set of skills, but also what a child experiences emotionally from the environment, from the ethos of the school and the relationships of the school, both child-to-child relationships and adult-to-child relationships. And in fact, the children also gain a lot from watching relationships between adults as well. So they perceive a whole community of relationships, and they perceive an ethos. And there is a huge amount of curriculum there, which the child learns. Welcome Hamza, and welcome Amy. And I'm not sure if I've got the full list, and I've greeted everyone else. So I'm hoping that makes sense. Is that making sense? There's something called, there's one of my most favorite educational theorists is called Neil Postman, and he emphasized the idea from someone called Marshall McLuhan that the medium is the message, meaning that deeper than the curriculum, deeper than the concepts and anything that is explicitly taught, is what a child experiences at the level of their souls, at the level of their emotional life and their soul life, that when they grow up and they move on and have forgotten everything they learned, they will remember an ethos, and they will remember their emotional experience from this time. And that's deep and profound to their future life in terms of how learning, what their relationship with learning, their motivation, their confidence, their self-concept, their sense of themselves, their relationship, their future career plans, is relevant to this subtle subliminal message that comes from the school. So I'm already talking too much. So I've got, we've evolved these 5 elements in the something I've called the theoretical framework of the school. And I'm going to take a lot of time during the year to try and go through each of these little bit at a time. And I really want to make it a little bit so that it's easy to pop into these Zoom calls. So I don't want to take too much, and I want to open for questions. So just briefly here, we've got, starting at the top, alive to the moment, with an emphasis on nonviolent communication and the ethos of being very conscious and very alert from a teacher's point of view, and also inviting a consciousness from everyone's point of view to be alert of what's happening right now and what are the needs of everyone in the room, and how can we best serve those needs. And in our context, those needs often are going to be educational, and we have an objective to learn some concepts and skills and certain elements of how we understand the world and ourselves and what it means to be human. And there is subtleties around there that we can deepen, especially since nonviolent communication is a profound influence that can have a profound influence to a person's life and their relationships and their self-concept and their sense of their growth and their learning. And there is the moment, and Kairos is a word that refers to a moment, and is the sense of how do we act appropriately from a psychological, educational, physical, safety, and other points of view. How do we adapt and be flexible to what's needs right now? And that might change from moment to moment. Then moving there to child's sight, and I'm undecided if this word is a good one because it's a made-up one. There has been, I think it's Dan Siegel who has the concept of mind sight, of understanding a person's mind and understanding the complexity of a mind from his point of view, at least. There is the idea from our point of view of trying to deeply understand a child per se, and the archetypal child for a particular age, which differs from age to age. So the needs of a 6-year-old is very different to a need for a 9-year-old. And you can dig into that, and the needs change from 6, 7 to 8 to 9-year-old, and moving onwards. And there's wonderful guidelines around the archetypal needs of a child, with a strong influence from Steiner on that point, Rudolf Steiner. But there's also needs from a nonviolent communication point of view, and the needs from a psychological point of view, and the child's personality, their temperament, their interests, their passions, etc. And if teachers are able to release themselves of their own projections and their own baggage informed by their own wounds of their lives, more and more come to see each individual child objectively, they will be more able to serve that child's needs, education, in the broader sense of an education. And then these two I see together. So working with a child's purpose or their gift or their genius, and we work with how a child has his or her own sense of purpose, meaning a balance between what the world needs, what the child can offer, what the child loves, what works for the society. Where does the child find their true element? Where do they find flow? There's all sorts of concepts and words that use to refer to the same thing. Where are they truly deeply happy? And also all the multifaceted child How do we serve, educate, challenge their intellect, their emotional life, their physical life, their musical life, their artistic life, all the different aspects of a child? How do we challenge all of it so that we educate holistically and ensure that the child is challenged and uh, provoked and stimulated in all aspects of themselves, in the sense that they might currently love dinosaurs for a young child, but actually they've got a real gift with music. And there's a broad sense of they might feel amazingly confident in the playground and therefore physical activities. How do we build that sense of confidence and bring it more into the maths class and music and art and social life? And then the sense of that the whole school fits as a system. And we are a learning school. We would like to adapt ourselves. We would like to be listening to the different voices in the school. Sometimes different people come in the schools and are into our school, and we want to deeply listen to what those new questions are in terms of what is alive in the school and how do we deeply work together effectively with parents, teachers, non-teaching staff, children, as well as the outside influences in the school, like benchmark tests and high school expectations and cousins and children's friends who go to other schools, etc. The whole thing works as a system, and how do we work with that system, conscious that everything interacts with each other as a system. That's it. There's my spiel for today. How can I open for comments, questions, disagreements, and anything else that you can offer? And you can raise a hand on Zoom, or you can just put your hand up and I'll try and look for. There's not too many people, so we can really just speak. I'm hoping you can just unmute yourself and start speaking. And for now, I'm going to stop sharing and see where we go. We could end there, but perhaps I'm assuming someone has something to offer, even if you agree. It'd be interesting to know. Nope. Usually the teacher guideline is you need to wait 30 seconds or 20 seconds to allow people to think about their questions.
Hello.
But something.
Yeah, no, I guess no one wants to go first, but and I'm having a little bit of an internet problem here. But I guess one of my questions, and also looking at, I think what was the one that was on top was about like being in the moment, I think.
Yes.
Something like that. I'm just wondering, with the Waldorf approach, what is the tension between like fantasy and, because a lot of it seems like built around fables and imagination, and it's not as grounded in contemporary events. So where do you find this space also with like traditions of social justice, for example, or the ways in which, how does the curriculum try and connect with what's actually going on the ground here in South Africa? I mean, I know that you try and do it through nonviolent communication, but I guess now, Carolina, over the years, I haven't seen as much about like the situation. I haven't seen the school engaging as much beyond the walls of the school, if I can put it that way. Not as a criticism, but I'm just wondering, what are the ideas that underlie that?
Great. Thanks, Nicole. That's really helpful. So I think in this regard, I'm really influenced strongly by Rudolf Steiner. And there is the idea, first of all, that political events in the world are sometimes age restricted and unhelpful to a young child's educational needs, because there is a deep emergence of a child's self coming into their life and into our world. And the world of events, in the outside world of events of maybe Nicole mentioned what you're thinking specifically, but for instance, I can suggest the recent Soccer World Cup is a very, very exciting thing that every second person I was talking to was interested in. And many Kairos kids were very interested in what was going on. And so those conversations do come into conversations in the school because children are interested in it. So we don't suppress these kind of conversations unless they're actually traumatic. I don't know, death and that might be scary to another child. But World Cup is something which is very interesting, and therefore might be we can somehow include it in some way because the child is raising it. But there are other needs that are more deep than World Cup. And World Cup is coming and going, and it's part of the mainstream media, and in fact created by mainstream media and this FIFA and an organization that is very much a product of the adult world. And what happens in a child's development is that the child has a deep unconscious need for a particular kind of content, because the child, him or herself, is going through a process that is not fully intellectual in what we adults see as facts. So when we say a fact and a child listens to the fact and absorbs the fact, there's a different experience how we receive a fact to a child receiving that fact. And that fact is experienced differently from a kindergarten child to a grade 4 child to a high school child. There's a gradual evolution of an understanding of what is truth. And truth is so when you tell a child a fairy tale to a 7-year-old of how the fox comes into a story and offers to help a prince to guide him through an adventure to get the golden bird, I'm thinking of a Norwegian fairy tale, there's a deep truth in that, and a profound truth, and we can analyze the truth in the Jungian psychological community. I've been to these discussions with a Jungian community, and there's a profound truth to that story. But from an objective point of view, a fox doesn't talk. But a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old can accept that a fox can talk. And therefore, for a young child, they can absorb truths that are deeply psychological, that can be understood by the soul, that one can't do when we're talking about a lesson on the World Cup. So a lesson that goes into the golden bird, which you can you can analyze for years on this particular story and a set of stories like that. Compare that to a series of lessons on the World Cup, where there's very little soul life that sits underneath a lesson plan about the World Cup. And a World Cup series of lessons is going to be extremely entertaining, and everyone's going to get into it because adults are caught up in the hype of it. But there's going to be very little leftover soul message coming out of that compared to getting into the journey of the youngest son who's going on this adventure. Nicole, how does that sound? And then I'd be eager to know how that lands to the rest of you.
No, it's interesting. I mean, I guess my overarching questions as well, when we were having the meeting with Sidra about the curriculum or what was going to be happening this year, she talked about introducing stories. She said they're from the Bible, but they're not necessarily from the Bible, but about justice, for example. And I guess my question is why? I think those are great, but why aren't they connected to a discussion of justice in South Africa? Like, I think one of the challenges that I find with Carolina, for example, is like we went to Constitution Hill, and I felt like for her age, she did not have the kind of grounding and understanding of what went on, what happened, what Constitution Hill means, what the Constitutional Court is, that she probably should. Like,
okay, so
I don't know. I'm just wondering, like, where is the? So I think these are all important things, but can they be more connected to what we see going on, like Zoo Lake, And I think there was I thought the project that you guys started there was really interesting about like regeneration. But there's also a history of Zoo Lake that's so fascinating, which is very political. It is very social. It has a story to tell itself. But I feel like sometimes those stories are overlooked.
So I would like to suggest that they're not overlooked, and those political perspectives of Zoo Lake and the history of Zoo Lake was very much a part of our classroom discussions in my class, where we're dealing with a question of equity and political equality and what is fair, because we've got children who have come to understand some level of historical knowledge. And having said that, Sidra's questions of justice certainly will touch on justice of South Africa, because it's easy to make a parallel. Bible stories is a easy way into just questions of good and bad and right and wrong, because grade 3 children and grade 4 children are often interested in what is fair and what is right and wrong. So because that age, because they like to talk themselves instinctively what is right and wrong, therefore stories that talk about what is right and wrong are ideally appropriate for that classroom. And if there's ways of looking at what is right and wrong about, let's say, the homeless population of the Zoo Lake, that is wonderful entry into that question of justice, because Carolina might be very eager to have an opinion of what's right and wrong. How do we deal with what's right and wrong we've just talked about what's right and wrong in a Bible story. Let's talk about what's right and wrong about the Zoo Lake's homeless population. But it's the theme, therefore, is right and wrong, and the stories that are, let me just go on a slight tangent. Something about the news of a Zoo Lake is a little bit more difficult to get into for a young child as the provocation of the theme than a mythological story that touches on the idea of a way of introducing what's right and wrong. If you get into a mythological image of right and wrong, and you experience that of a story, then Carolina can be looking around her world and say, okay, I'm hearing right and wrong. Here's my experience of this story, and I really believe this is right, and I really believe this is wrong. I really believe grade 5 child did something wrong to me, because I've just had a story about fairness coming from this mythological image. And so the way in is easier to get in through mythology, meaning folk tales, fairy tales, myths, like ancient long myths, short myths, teaching stories from an archetypal point of view. It's easy to experience an archetypal message through story and then touch on events of the day. It's very difficult to take for a young child to see the symbolic value of a homeless child in the news of an event in the newspaper. But it's easier to take a mythological image and then generalize that into life. It's very challenging for it's an academic task, and often a weakness in my experience in universities, that a student can take an incident in the world and extrapolate that into a general principle of life. So if you're going to go into facts of the world, it's very difficult to generalize that. It's not easy to get into taking the particular situated event and understand the theory. That's a university, that's the life of an academic. But the myth does that for a child. The myth gives the child a metaphorical image, and Steiner's guidelines there's a genius in it, because there's a way of reaching the child's needs. The child has an interest in right and wrong, because grade 3 children are often eager to know about right and wrong in their psychology. And therefore, a myth that shows them right and wrong is an amazing way of getting to them in their emotional life. How does that sound good? Is that clear?
It is. Thank you. Thank you. No, it's very helpful. Thank you.
I'm eager to have this on an ongoing conversation. So I'm hoping this might sit over a week and then come back next week or a few weeks time saying, you've got a new